Today, my friends, I did something that I genuinely never thought I'd do again. I plugged in my Xbox and launched Halo 5 Guardians. Now, I last played Halo 5 over 4 years ago for a kind of pre-Halo Infinite release sayonara video, and honestly, I thought that would be the last time that I'd ever play that game. For those who don't know, Halo 5 is my least favourite Halo by a country mile. I strongly dislike so many aspects of this game, and the campaign is absolutely no exception. But you know, a lot's happened in 4 years, and so today, given that this year is also Halo 5's 10th anniversary, which is crazy, I thought it'd be interesting to return to Halo 5's campaign and to kind of reanalyze it through the lens of being a Halo fan in 2025, aka through the lens of living in the video game equivalent to the Sahara Desert. But to understand Halo 5's campaign, you have to start in the years leading up to it. Halo 5 had arguably the greatest marketing campaign that we will ever see for a video game. Both its actual content and also the way that it was done was so captivating and immersive, it was just downright masterful. It was teeing us up for what was looking to be the best Halo story to date, and I promise that I'm not exaggerating. So the marketing centered around this almost unimaginable scenario. The Master Chief had gone AWOL and was being painted as the bad guy. So much so that Oni had deployed their own Spartan to hunt him down. The whole marketing was just dripping in this dark, clandestine aura. Oni were at the heart of it, but can we really trust them? After all, they're essentially Halo's very own CIA who have an immeasurable number of skeletons in their own closet. Can we trust their word that Chief is a traitor? Can we trust this mysterious Spartan they've sent to hunt him down and bring him to justice? The whole thing was just steeped in conspiracy. If, like me, you've always been fascinated with real-world conspiracy theories, especially those connected to shadowy government agencies, then Halo 5's marketing was exactly the kind of fiction that you were craving. And it all culminated in the best way possible, with the Hunt the Truth audio drama. In many ways, Hunt the Truth was kind of the second coming of Halo 2's I Love Bees. And funnily enough, it followed the story of wartime journalist Benjamin Giroux, who was actually the photographer who took the famous picture of Chief in New Mombasa that ended up being the Halo 2 cover art. Ben was hired by Oni to write something of a puff piece about the Master Chief, but in his research, he started to realise that things about the Spartans weren't quite adding up, which led to him discovering the dark history of humanity's saviours. What followed was him constantly trying to evade Oni whilst they were hunting him down, and ending with them winning, discrediting all of Ben's findings that he was going to use to expose Oni on live TV, and then disappearing him to Midnight Facility, the highest security, non-existent prison in the entire galaxy. It was also during Hunt the Truth where we were fed the lie that Chief went AWOL because he supposedly shot up a meeting between human and elite delegates, which of course we later found out wasn't the full truth. Now that's a very brief breakdown, but I truly cannot put into words how perfect the vibe of Hunt the Truth was. It was genuinely creepy. It played into real-world conspiracy theories and planted them in universe with that same kind of unsettling aura that they give off in the real world, and it teed up Halo 5's campaign perfectly. We'd be playing as Spartan Locke, the highly classified Oni Spartan sent by the agency to hunt down the Master Chief, whilst also playing as Chief to see the other side of the story. We'd never had a Halo story with stakes like this before. It was totally different to anything that we'd come to expect. It was looking to flip the Halo story formula on its head and really make us question things in ways that we'd never done so before. This was the most excited that I had ever been for a Halo campaign. Yes, even more so than Halo 3. My expectations were through the roof, but unfortunately, as we all know, Hunt the Truth barely ended up having any bearing on Halo 5's actual story whatsoever. So, with that in mind, what do I think of Halo 5's story now, 10 years later? Well, I still think that its opening just sets the complete wrong tone. The game that was supposed to be about exploring the dark moralities of Oni and how they're able to craft their own truth and sell it to the civilians of the Halo universe opens with the most over-the-top sequence that's very clearly a pale imitation of the intro to Age of Ultron, which just so happened to come out earlier that year. It's not a bad cutscene by any means, it's well produced, it's well animated, it's just complete tonal whiplash compared to what we were expecting and what I was really hoping this campaign was going to be about. And the opening level that's attached to this cutscene really doesn't do it any favours either. It takes Julim Dharma, the leader of the main Covenant Splinter faction who was built up over the course of Halo 4 Spartan Ops and Halo Escalation, and also an entire trilogy of books, and just deletes him from the entire story in a cutscene. This was 343's way of cleaning the narrative slate so that we weren't bogged down by loads of narrative threads from old stories, and so we could focus on the brand new story that Halo 5 was about to tell. But it just came off as a really shitty and cheap way to tie up one of the many loose ends that they'd foolishly set up. It was so bad, in fact, that they actually ended up adding Julim Dharma as a boss fight in Warzone in the post-launch updates purely to try and quell the outrage from us not getting to actually kill him in gameplay. In keeping with this tonal whiplash though, the next level is, I actually think, one of the top 3 best levels that 343 ever made, and one of the main reasons for that is that it's actually in keeping with the tone established by the marketing. The level, aptly named Blue Team, has Chief, who is now accompanied by Blue Team, going to secure a missing-in-action Oni research station that's been sold to Julim Dharma's Covenant. On board, Oni were testing a highly virulent parasite called Asteroidia on jackals and also humans, with intents of turning it into a bioweapon. The whole framing of this level is a mixture of subtle horror and the clandestine tones of Hunt the Truth. If this level had been the narrative basis for the rest of the campaign, I truly think that Halo 5 would have gone down as one of the all-time greats. But instead, it was dropped entirely and the story went in a complete different and incorrect direction. If I was in charge of writing Halo 5, then the story would have been about Oni's weaponization of Asteroidia falling into the wrong hands, getting into the hands of ex-Covenant terror organizations and insurrectionists all across the galaxy. And because Chief and Blue Team were the last ones known to be at Argent Moon, Oni used them as scapegoats to cover up for their screw-up, which leads to Blue Team being framed as bioterrorists and leads to Osiris hunting them down whilst they try and stop outbreaks. You could have even kept some of the elements of the Cortana plot in that story as well. Chief's Cortana hallucination is the one single good moment with Cortana in this entire game. It's framed almost like a nightmare that Chief's having over something actually real. Now imagine if Chief's side of the game was about evading Oni whilst trying to stop bioterrorism incidents and asteroidia outbreaks across the galaxy, all whilst being plagued by these nightmarish visions caused by his grief and guilt from losing Cortana. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. Even still though, Blue Team is a really great mission. And with it concludes the first of Halo 5's 4 story arcs, leading into the second one, which takes place on the colony of Meridian. Meridian is an ex-UNSC outer colony that was glassed by the Covenant and then abandoned by the UNSC, leaving a power vacuum that was filled by the Liang Dortmund Corporation, who moved in to profit off the glass. Being an outer colony, its inhabitants, both civilian and corporate, have severe disdain for the UNSC, which makes for rather interesting tension when a group of Oni spooks randomly show up. And I will admit, the Meridian story arc has actually quite grown on me over the years. It's hardly a significant one. I mean, you just go there, realise Blue Team and Cortana have awoken the Prometheans below, help clear them out, and then leave. But seeing the attitude towards you of those living here feels really in line with the expanded universe and the kind of general outer colony sentiment towards the UNSC. And getting to experience that in a game is really cool. That said though, I do think that the Meridian aesthetic, besides the lava, is deeply ugly, and I did not enjoy playing through 4 levels of it. And it's made even worse by the fact that the only enemies that you fight here are the Prometheans too, which I also just strongly dislike in Halo 5 in almost every way. Not only are Halo 5's Prometheans way less fun to fight than Halo 4's, but if you stand too close to them when you kill them, it covers your screen in this really obnoxious heavy blur effect that feels really nauseating. Somehow I never noticed this until this playthrough, and I literally can't unsee it now. It's really annoying. The overall story of the Meridian section is just fine, I guess. The detective elements of the hunt, in air quotes, are still present, but they kind of just happen passively in the background whilst you kill Prometheans. At no point does it actually feel like you're hunting the Master Chief, even though you are. Even on the weapons down missions, which are literally meant to be dedicated investigation levels. It just feels like the hunt is happening in the background, completely disconnected from you. There's also barely any investigation involved either. I mean, you just spam the Artemis, go to a few waypoints, listen to a line or two of dialogue from an NPC, and then leave. There's barely any agency involved at all. It honestly feels like an on-rails section, to be honest, which really does not help you feel like you're actually hunting the Chief. The detective mechanics, which I find it hard to say, feel so underdeveloped. Now, what I will say, something that is not uninteresting about this story arc, and honestly the entirety of Halo 5 in general, is the backdrops and the set pieces. You know, this is something that I only realised Halo 5 did so well with the hindsight of playing Halo Infinite, which is almost entirely devoid of them. So far, we've had the huge Kamchatka aerial battle, the Kraken assaulting the Promethean line, Jules' entire fleet arriving at Argent Moon, the Guardian rising out of the glass and our ascent up the scaffolding at the apex of the space elevator as it prepares to jump. And then later on, we have backdrops like the war at Sinion and the Guardian rising out of the ocean, and then using mag boots to run down the spine of the Guardian. Compared to Halo Infinite, which had literally one set piece and not a single immersive backdrop vignette at all, Halo 5 has made me really miss them. Seeing all this stuff going on beyond the bounds of the level really helps to get you immersed. Oh, and one last thing before we move on to the best arc of Halo 5, I feel like I'd get burnt at the stake if I didn't at least mention the Chief and Locke fight. And you know what? I don't hate this fight as much as most people. I think partly because the mocap for it is so good, especially compared to Infinite's mocap, which was horrendously bad at times, but I will say the fight does feel a little anticlimactic. I think that instead of this fight just being a bit of a bitch slap in a cutscene, this fight should have been an actual boss fight right at the end of the game where you get to play as either Chief or Locke. I think having it happen so early in the game and in a cutscene where we have no agency over it just kind of made it fall flat, given that this was theoretically the crescendo of the hunt. Now, skipping over Blue Team's Genesis level, which we are going to come to later, the story then jumps to the homeworld of the elites, Sanghelios, because Osiris need to wake up its Guardian themselves to go to Chief, which, granted, is actually quite a cool plot thread. Now, I think it's almost a universal opinion at this point that the Sanghelios arc is the best bit of Halo 5, and whilst I do agree, I think the main reason for that is because right up until the very end at least, it feels entirely detached from the game's main plot. There's very little talk about Cortana, or the Created, or the Prometheans. In a way, it kind of feels like a mini vacation away from the game's main plot to an area of the universe that I and many others are particularly fond of. And in fact, that brings me to a pretty major point that I really noticed on this playthrough. The absolute best parts of Halo 5, when it really shines, are when it focuses on its B-plots, instead of the overarching narrative. For example, Blue Team, where you're denying Julumdama's Covenant an Oni bioweapon. Meridian, where you're having to navigate dissenting outer colonists as an Oni spook. And Sanghelios, where you're interfering in the Arbiter's war that Oni want nothing to do with, even going as far as ensuring plausible deniability should something go wrong. And it's no coincidence that these plots that all shine happen to feel intrinsically tied to that clandestine dark Oni narrative from Hunt the Truth, unlike the main story, which absolutely doesn't. Inadvertently getting involved in a war that Oni want no part of, despite their constant efforts to destabilize the elite to ensure that they can never be a threat again, plays into the Black Ops classified aura that I was seriously hoping the campaign would focus on. With all that said though, upon replaying it, I will say the Sanghelios arc has kinda started to pale a bit for me. Firstly, you'd think that being on Sanghelios in the middle of the Arbiter's civil war would mean that we'd spend most of this arc fighting alongside the elites again, something that I think we'd all been craving deeply since Halo 3. And although you do fight alongside elites, you do so for like 15 seconds. About 5 elites fight with you during the Mantis run, and then about 3 elites fight alongside you and the Arbiter for literally the first room of Sinion, and then that's it. There's nothing like elite reinforcements coming in to help you clear Void of Flood on Floodgate, or storming the third tower on the Covenant, or any of Halo 2's Arbiter sections. Most of the time, despite you fighting for the Arbiter in his war, you're just fighting alongside the same Spartans that you're with everywhere else, which really detracts from the unique traits of the location that you're actually fighting at. This is just one of the many byproducts of 343's incessant need to tell Spartan stories and to only focus on the Spartans. It's a fine example of how that philosophy makes even the most interesting scenarios boring. It's amazing how, regardless of the fact that Halo 5's story takes place at several varied locations spread all across the galaxy, this narrow-minded philosophy still makes the universe feel so small. It also doesn't help that the elites in this game look absolutely nothing like elites whatsoever. I mean, that's not an elite. I'm sorry, that's not an elite. All that said though, I do really like how Buck honours the dead elites as our fallen brothers, and how Vale shouts to the elites in Sangheli when you arrive to save the Arbiter. It does help to make you feel not entirely disconnected from the setting. The weapons down missions here lose all of their source as well. At least on Meridian there was a little bit of detective work. Here, all the elements of investigation just go out the window. You talk to Palmer, you talk to Halsey, and you leave. That's it. The Kraken fight is equally as mid too. We've been missing Scarab fights since ODST, and I genuinely thought the Kraken was going to be the next evolution of the Scarab, but it really wasn't. What it had in scale, it entirely lost in dynamicness. The Scarabs in Halo 3 and ODST were actual functioning AI, whereas this is just a piece of geometry that explodes when you blow the core. It's like an even worse version of Halo 2's Scarab, because at least with Halo 2's Scarab you had agency in when you actually boarded it. The Sanghelios arc does end on a relatively decent crescendo with the Battle of Sinion though. Yeah, the total lack of elite allies during the climax of the Arbiter's civil war feels incredibly, well, anticlimactic. But I think that the level itself does do a good job of selling the finality of the war, especially with the skybox which fills with the Arbiter's fleet whilst there's dogfights going on all around. I find that Halo 5 really struggles to convey the stakes of what you're actually doing through gameplay, but that slack tends to get picked up really well by both the set pieces and also the backdrops. And the great example of this is the opener of the fourth and final arc, Genesis, which, at least from Osiris' point of view, opens with this awesome section where you're literally defying gravity and running down the spine of a Guardian using mag boots to reach the surface. Seriously, I hope whoever designed this section got a raise. Blue Team's part of this arc starts a few levels earlier though, with them being brought to this strange world with no idea what's going on, besides Cortana supposedly being here. And you know, I will say, the mystery leading up to the Cortana reveal is actually quite good. It gets really dark when Blue Team mentioned the amount of innocent lives lost on Meridian thanks to them waking the Guardian up.
Chief, back on Meridian. There was a lot of destruction. There were civilians.
I know.
And that dark tone remains when the Warden reveals himself. He starts pulling on Chief PTSD from what happened to Cortana, which also continues into the next section. I swear, this stuff would have been so good if it didn't culminate in the return of Cortana, but instead ended up being the Didact, or the grand manipulations of the Flood trying to break Chief and take him out of the equation, kind of like how they did to the Didact actually during the war, so that when they arrive again, they can easily swarm humanity. My main problem with the Genesis arc is that it doesn't have a B-plot to distract me, because it's the game's finale, and so it has to focus entirely on the A-plot, dropping all of the dark, shadowy, only narrative elements in the process. And this culminates in the absolute worst level, not just in this game, but I genuinely think the worst level in the entire franchise. The breaking. The breaking, yeah, breaking my will to fucking live. I will say this level being set in the domain is a cool idea, and the skybox looks awesome, and also there are a few really cool lines of dialogue from Chief.
It's so good to see you again, John. So good to see all of you back together as a family.
Psychological tactics. Saying my name. Playing nice.
What would you have me do?
Tell me the truth. How many people died when you called the Guardians here?
Excuse me?
You know, don't you? The exact body count.
But the rest of this level, in almost every other way, is just horrendous. It's one big, grey, monochromatic jungle gym that's populated only by the worst enemies in the entire franchise, capped off with a triple Warden boss fight, having already fought him 4 times identically already, and then ended with the reveal that Cortana is actually alive. You know, I absolutely detest retcons in almost any fictional universe. I hate them, even with things that I don't like. But there's one exception, a single exception that I would make, and that would be retconning the fact that Cortana is alive and is evil. This scene right here completely invalidates Halo 4's ending. Cortana becoming evil retroactively damages her character as far back as Halo 1. It set the story down a horrendous and just plain uninteresting path that was so bad that 343 had to conclude it off-screen in Halo Infinite, and also in a way that essentially walked back everything Cortana stood for in Halo 5. The created AI uprising and Cortana becoming an evil space dictator are the absolute worst things to ever happen to Halo's lore, and I really wish that Halo Infinite had either retconned them entirely, which obviously was never going to happen, or explained them away as some kind of grand manipulation on behalf of either the Didact or the Flood. And the worst bit is that Halo 5 doesn't even try to resolve this story arc because it set it up far too late. In fact, Halo 5's ending does the opposite. It goes out of its way to ensure that the next several entries in Halo's story will have to be drowning in this nonsense direction. They took a stupid, nonsensical leap of faith that created a deeply unsatisfying ending that ensured that we'd have to wallow in its consequences for years to come. We are still getting stories about the Created set during the Created era, and I'm so sick of it. Oh, and just to add insult to injury, they also chose to omit Chief and Arbiter's fateful reunion, and yeah, of course, save it for a book that about 1% of the people who played the games would actually read. Halo 5 was a victim of 2 major problems. Number 1, its own ambitions, and number 2, a terrible main plot. There's just far too much going on in this game. There are far too many characters, far too many locations, too many side plots. There's simply too much to adequately flesh out in 15 levels, and so it either feels underdeveloped or just flat out rushed. The right way to do this game would have been to have a kind of Ground Zeroes style Halo Guardians prequel game that went through Chief's side of things, and then have Halo 5 be Locke's detective story where you're traveling the galaxy looking for clues for both his whereabouts and also his motivations for doing what he's doing. Halo 5 does have some really good moments that all happen to be part of its B-plots that tie into the clandestine, shady doings of Oni. The problem is that these B-plots get overshadowed by the terrible A-plot, which forces the tone that Hunt the Truth set up so perfectly either into the backseat or out of the picture entirely. The Cortana turning evil plotline should have either never existed at all, or if it did have to exist, it should have been some kind of misdirection. A red herring that ends up being the manipulation of the Didact or the Flood, who should have been the main antagonists of this Reclaimer trilogy. Instead, Halo 5 should have focused far more on Chief's grief from losing Cortana, as he tries to stop bioterrorist attacks thanks to the asteroidia bioweapon that Oni were making on Argent Moon falling into the wrong hands, all the while he's plagued by nightmarish PTSD-induced visions of Cortana. And then, at the same time, Osiris would have been acting as a direct arm of Oni, hunting down the Chief to bring him to justice for allowing Asteroidia to fall into the wrong hands, playing into the idea of Oni using Chief and Blue Team as scapegoats for their messed up bioweapon experiments that went wrong. It would have been like a different take on Mona Lisa. This story would have been awesome. It would have had real stakes, a far more personal touch with Chief, and a hunt that actually plays into the dark, shadowy doings of Oni and other UNSC-related 3-letter agencies. But instead, we got what we got. So, now that we know where Halo 5's story went in its sequel, for all intents and purposes it was concluded off-screen and then entirely dropped, how would I have dealt with Halo 5's sequel? Well, it'll be no surprise to hear that I would have had it lead to the return of the Flood. I still think that the most interesting way to rationalize Cortana's thoughts and actions in Halo 5 is to have them be side effects of the Logic Plague, which was given to her by the Gravemind during Halo 3, thus making everything that happens in Halo 5 technically the doings of the Flood. Gaining control of the Guardians to lock down every major planet in the galaxy, crippling the UNSC, locking Chief in a cryptum, all things that the Flood would want to do to make the galaxy as easy to consume upon their return as possible. And so I would have had the sequel to Halo 5 story be focused on the grand return of the Flood in the form of the Precursor's final test for the mantle. In Halo Silentium, the final book in the Forerunner trilogy which should have laid the groundwork for the entire Reclaimer trilogy, the Primordial tells Bornstellar that the Flood will return to test humanity when they are at their most ripe, to see if they are truly worthy inheritors of the Precursor's mantle of responsibility. And you know, if you ask me, humanity were at their most ripe in the years following Halo 4. The UNSC was at its absolute apex strength, led by gigantic superships like the Infinity. Spartans were produced en masse with the Spartan 4s, and the UNSC's reach and dominion across the galaxy was greater than it had ever been before. And you know, to me, that sounds like a textbook ripe species. As for Cortana seizing Zeta Halo in the legendary ending, well, that's easy. Zeta Halo not only contains a wealth of Flood containment facilities, but its extreme significance during the Forerunner Flood War would have made it the most symbolically perfect location to set this final test game. Both us and our ancestors making a final stand against a galactic outbreak of Flood seeking to seize the mantle from us at the exact same installation would have made for a beautiful full circle moment. So, with all that said, I guess the last thing to touch on is the hotly debated topic of whether Halo 5 should come to PC. And, well, my opinion is that if we lived in an ideal world with infinite resources, absolutely, yes it should do. But unfortunately, resources are finite, and when they could go to improving Halo 7, or developing an ODST game, or a Flood survival horror game, or god forbid Halo Wars 3, the last thing I want them to go to instead of any of those options is porting Halo 5 to PC. Yes, for completionist's sake, it would be great, I agree, but looking at the other options that they could go to instead, I think it'd be a colossal waste of resources. So, that is Halo 5 10 years later, which feels very, very weird to say. Have your opinions changed on Halo 5 since it released? Are they equally as positive or negative as they were when it came out, or are they entirely different? Let me hear it down below in the comments. And with that said, let's round this one out there. I want to give a huge thank you to Cole Cura for becoming a new Primordial over on Patreon. My dude, thank you very much. Also, how fitting for you to do that in this video when we spent so much time talking about the Primordial and the Precursor's final test. Very fitting. And also, thank you to everyone else who supports me over there as well, and thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.